Bentonville or Fayetteville, Sherman's goal was Goldsboro, again, these railroads. You got to always think in terms of the railroads. Johnson very much wanted to redeem himself, and his idea was to attack one of these two columns coming up from the lower reaches of South Carolina, one under a General Howard and another one under, I can't think of the other general's name, but he knew they would combine their forces. He wanted to hit one of them, destroy it, and then go for the other one. Again, you have these audacious Confederate plans to do something other than just quitting. But meanwhile, what happened on April the 15th, 1865? The assassination of Abraham Lincoln. When Lee got his favorable terms on Palm Sunday, April the 9th, Lincoln was still very much received as some sort of a benevolent figure that might show a little more mercy and generosity and charity toward the South. Indeed, his second inauguration speech would have indicated that, with malice toward none and charity for all. Let us bind up the nation's wounds and heal for those who have lost their husbands, children, so forth. Very beautiful piece of prose. I had a teacher at the University of North Carolina who said that Lincoln was the greatest friend the South ever had. And it aroused me from my usual state of lethargy and brought me into a state of consciousness, and I couldn't believe what he said. It may have been true, but when Lincoln was assassinated on April the 15th, while Johnson and Sherman were trying to come to terms, what do you think the Congress felt in Washington? Well, did they still have that charitable, benevolent intent? No, not at all. Sherman gave Johnson the sort of same terms that Grant had given Lee, even better. He just said, go home, obey the law, recognize the federal court system, take an oath not to fight against the United States. You can keep your weapons. Well, that reached Congress, and they were infuriated. President Johnson, the only Southerner who remained with the Union, only congressman from North Carolina originally and from Tennessee, sent a message to Sherman saying, you will resume hostilities. Then Grant got into the act and realized, again, they were worried about this guerrilla warfare thing. You'd better placate these Confederate soldiers. You'd better help them. Or we're going to have some real problems. It'll take over 1 million men to subjugate a landmass that's probably the size of Western Europe. The only thing that's really been conquered are the major cities and the railroads and the seizures of the rivers and estuaries and Mississippi. Other than that, what have we got? Nothing. These people aren't subjugated. Let's give them another offer they can't refuse. So ultimately, Johnson's men received a similar term, as did Lee, and things began unraveling and falling apart in the South. But as indicated earlier, these other Confederate armies were still in the field, last flag down above the Shenandoah. And things didn't really get hot until Reconstruction. Meanwhile, they had to make sure that everything was subjugated south of the Mason-Dixon line before they could start that with the 14th Amendment and so forth. I think that should conclude my presentation. If I missed any dots that anybody would like to connect, any questions you have, I would be delighted to hear from you.
What is your speculation and what happened to the gold reserves of the Confederate government?
Well, that is a great mystery. I don't know. I wish I could answer your question. the whole Confederate cabinet, all their files and everything, was put on that train leaving Richmond down to Danville, Virginia. That was going to be the next capital. But what happened to it, we don't know. One interesting figure in the Confederate government was he'd been the Secretary of War and the Secretary Treasurer from Louisiana.
Benjamin Judah.
Yeah. He saved his gold. He went to England and became a Queen's Counselor, the highest in the hierarchy of the legal profession in England. A very resourceful man. He was Jewish, but everybody loved him. He always had sort of a supercilious smile on his face when he talked to the Confederate general. They didn't like him much, a lot of them didn't, but he was a sort of a brilliant man. Maybe he got the gold, I don't know. Yes, sir.
There was a statement by a lady in Newberry, South Carolina. If you remember, Joe Wheeler and his men had been put in charge of the boxes of Confederate gold. And she had claimed that out in front of her house in Newberry that Joe Wheeler and his men were carving up the spoils there.
Really?
Yeah. And
That's a fascinating
because I
story.
think some of the cadets from Annapolis, I believe it was, had been in charge of guarding the gold. And Wheeler said, "You can go, we'll take care of that." And but we do know when it came to Charlotte, it was intact.
Yeah.
You know, but now whether this woman was telling the truth or there's any validity to that, I don't know. But it is interesting, you know, since we can't come up with an answer.
It really is. Well, it's also interesting to me that, believe it or not, one of the things that helped the South was the infusion of Northern capital. We blame carpetbaggers, people who came down here to exploit, self-aggrandizement, that sort of thing. One of my grandfathers, the only place he could borrow money was from the old Mercantile Bank and Trust Company in Baltimore, Maryland. There weren't any banks around Tarver, North Carolina, Edgecombe County. You had to get money to plant seed and that sort of thing. So people were very charitable. Believe it or not, and you can read all the school book fantasies you want to. It's just a shame that children in high school and even college students don't really feel the impact or really know the true story. Again, I don't want to run out of time, but I have to show you this. Black leader in Confederate gray. I met this guy. He came and spoke to us at our Civil War Roundtable in Davidson, North Carolina. His great-grandfather, I think, was a slave, but during the fights, he took his place on the firing line. And around, it must have been about 70,000 black Confederates. Interesting thing is they were integrated with white Confederate soldiers. The North did not do that. There were no black officers in the Union Army. Well, I don't think there were in the South either. But there were close relationships. This man was asked two questions, which I thought were very interesting. He said, somebody said, does the Confederate flag offend you? He said, well, you know, it really just depends on who's flying it. All I'm trying to do is do all this research. He's a genealogist, and I just want to know what the truth is. They're not necessarily white supremacists. They were fighting for their land, just like the slaves were and the free blacks. They were invaded. And the next question was, do you think there was any affection that could ever existed between a slave and his master? He said, possibly, but mostly it was accommodation. Slave knew that he had to do what the master said in order to survive, to become a house servant in his old age. Master knew that he had to keep that slave's morale up, keep him happy. It was quite an investment if you bought a tractor today, you wouldn't leave it out in the cold and the rain. You'd take care of it. So you have that sort of an exchange, a mutual survival aspect of slavery going on. And I certainly don't defend it. But Southerners were just caught in a trap that they didn't know how to solve it. Jefferson Davis says, well, if you kill slavery, what are you going to do with the corpse? You've got 1 million of uneducated blacks. How do you employ them? What are we going to do? A similar type question faces us today with illegal immigrants. What are you going to do with 10 million illegal immigrants? You going to ship them back to Mexico? You can't do that. We're stuck with them, so we gotta do something while they're here. Excuse me for getting off the track.
Bill, let's take 3 more
Yes.
questions.
Are you related to Dorsey Pender?
Dorsey Pender was my great-grandfather's first cousin. That great-grandfather of mine was a lawyer in Edgecombe County. He did not fight. He was a sickly man. And he died in 1866, right after the birth of my grandfather. But Dorsey was a quiet man.
2 more questions.
Would you recite Lee's farewell
Yes.
to his tribute?
I'll do my best.
Now, wait, you have to do that last. Anybody else got a question? Last call. Okay, then close it out with the quotation.
Well, interesting story is Lee placed one of his aides de camp, I think it was a Colonel Marshall, in a ambulance wagon on April the 9th, the evening of April the 9th after the surrender. He says, look, I'm not going to just tell my soldiers goodbye. I want to make an address to them. You draft it. I will edit it tomorrow morning. You bring it to me. So Colonel Marshall drafted this beautiful piece of prose, I thought, brought it to Lee, and Lee looked at it, made a few changes, modifications in it, but pretty well left it intact. There were about 13 of them printed. They had a printing press. You couldn't talk to 20,000 men, so it was sort of disseminated among the various commanders, and it was read out loud to them, and it proceeded as follows. Up top, Headquarters, Army of Northern Virginia, April 9, 1865, General Order Number 9. After 4 years of arduous service, marked by unsurpassed fortitude and courage, the Army of Northern Virginia has been compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources. I need not tell the brave survivors of so many hard-fought battles who have remained steadfast to the last that I have consented to this result from no distrust of them, but feeling that valor and devotion could accomplish nothing that could compensate for the loss that would attend the continuance of the contest. I have therefore determined to avoid the useless sacrifice of those whose past services have endeared them to their countrymen. By the terms of the agreement, all officers and men may return to their homes and remain until exchanged. You will take with you the satisfaction that proceeds from a consciousness of duty faithfully performed. And I earnestly pray that a merciful God will extend to you his blessings and protection. With a fond remembrance of your kind and generous consideration for myself, and with an unyielding admiration of your constancy and devotion, I bid you all an affectionate farewell.